Hello, class. Today I'm going to be teaching you about a concept that's usually waited until you're in middle school to teach you, but I think you guys are smart enough to where I can teach it to you now. And it's this idea of unknown variables and how to use them. So an unknown variable, essentially, like, what does that mean? And usually we say them for algebra, and algebra is a math that, like I said, you usually take in like middle school starting, but essentially, it's when you don't know something, it's unknown, a variable, some sort of item, and usually it's expressed in some letter of the alphabet. ABC, normally, XYZ is another really popular one. And usually you see them alongside numbers in math problems, essentially, to represent some sort of unknown number, essentially. And I'm going to give you an example right now. We can't work with this, right? This is a letter, we are doing math, and we need numbers here. So we have to make this letter meaningful to us. And to do that, we have to figure out what it means, essentially. And usually when you see something like this, you'll see also along the side, solve for A, essentially. Figure out what A means. Or what is A? And in order to do this, what you need to work with this equal sign, essentially. And when you look at the equal sign, imagine this is in two different parts, right? This equals this. And whatever you do, you can actually move numbers around for the equal sign, essentially. This and this. Does that make sense? You have any questions? No? Okay. And you guys understand the concept of the number line where you have 0 right in the center. And let's pretend, like, you can actually think of that equal sign as your 0. Okay, it just means nothing. And if you, let's say 5, because 5 is right here. If I'm moving 5 positively, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 5, positive 5. But the other way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's negative 5. You can think of it that way, essentially. So, if you want to solve for A, you have to get A by itself. So, from one side to the other, you have to get rid of this 5, because that's the only thing standing in our way from just getting this by itself. So, what can you do here? Well, what you'd have to do is cancel it out. Find the opposite of what this is and get rid of it. So for 5, we said positive 5, and then on the other side it's negative 5. So negative 5, and whatever you do here, you always do to the other side, like here and here, because they have to be equal to each other, right? Equal. All right, so how do I know that was a positive? Can anyone tell me? Well, essentially, like, if you don't have like a plus sign here, and there's no sort of like negative sign either, we just assume that it's positive. Just keep that in mind. If there's nothing in the way, you just assume that it's positive. So you have that and that. 5 minus 5, essentially, you could write it that way, make it look a little nicer. 5 minus 5 is 0, so 0, or we could just scribble that just so it's out of the way. And then move it down here. A equals 9, we have that 5 minus 5. You guys can solve that. A equals 4. And that's essentially it. We solved for A. Alright, and that's how you work with unknown variables and getting them by themselves. Alright, let's try something a little bit different. Different, I wouldn't call it difficult because I think you guys can handle it, but it's a little different. We're going to work with multiplication, right? Let's see, 7. All right. This is the letter B, by the way. All right, now what's happening here? We kind of smush them together. I'll let you know right now. We are multiplying right here. This is multiplication. Now, how would you usually express multiplication with, like, you know, let's say 7 times 1. If you want to write that down, like, shoot at me. Like, you know, we put an X. We can say, we have like a dot there. You could also use parentheses, right? But for letters, because they're not really workable and because they look different from the numbers, you can't really confuse them. So like, if this was a 1, for example, it's not, but let's just say it is. You would get confused because like 7 times 1, is it 71? You know, but because a letter is very clearly not a number, you can actually smush them together and keep them right next to each other. And that represents multiplication. All right. So once again, we have to get b by itself. Let's say solve for b. We have to get b by itself. So remember the last problem we subtracted when there was a positive number, because positive is like addition and negative is subtraction. So what do we do here for multiplying? For multiplying at first, how do you think we would, like, what would the opposite be essentially, quote unquote? Is the, it would be division. So we would divide by that 7 to get it out of the way. Boop, boop. Divide by 7, just right there. And remember, whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. So actually, let's make a separate line, just so it's clear. Then we're just gonna like space them out a little bit. Okay. All right, does this make sense? Does anyone have any questions here? All right, so we would cancel that out. I'm left with b equals, anybody want to know what this is? 21 divided by 7? 3. Awesome. And that's what we did. We solved for b. All right, so far, does anyone have any questions? Anything at all? Anything confusing? All right. So now we're going to move on to something a little bit longer of a problem. But I think you guys can handle it. Let's make that. There we go. Got a little bit squished at the end. But 6 divided by parentheses c minus 4 equals 10. All right. So what do we know about parentheses? Why is this here? Well, essentially what we use parentheses for is that if we want to separate something and kind of keep it together in sort of like its own little world and its own little bubble, we would use parentheses, kind of like in the same way that you would, you know, English in sentences. You would use, if you want to separate something from a sentence, you would use parentheses. And in math, same sort of deal. So, actually, let's make that a plus sign. Don't want to like throw too much at you guys at once. Let's make that a plus sign. So, this is in parentheses, but we have, like within the parentheses, we have that unknown variable, that thing that we cannot work with. So, we have to sort of ignore this because we can't start here, because we physically can't because we don't know what this is. So we have to come out here, get rid of the 6. And how do we get rid of the 6? Well, how do we know which side of the number line is on? It's positive or negative? It's positive. So we would have to subtract, like normal, and this. Do you guys know what this is? It's essentially like bringing like anything past this is repeated. And then 10 minus 6. All right, so this cancels out and becomes 0, so we're left with all right, you probably see where this is going by now, but with the parentheses, because we have it by itself now, there's nothing to separate because it's separated by this equal sign. So we can actually get rid of that parentheses. And what's left to do? Get that c by itself. We have to move this. Cancel it out. Plus 4. Plus 4. C equals 8. All right. And we solve for C. Now, all this time I've been doing these math problems, what's the one thing that I have not been doing that's really important for all math problems? I haven't been checking my work. So, it's actually pretty simple to check your work with something like this. All you have to do is plug that variable back in. So, we now know that c equals 8, so let's just keep that in mind and rewrite everything. Just so we can make clear board space. Some board space. Let's get rid of this too. So we know, or we believe, c equals 8. And the problem was 6 plus c, parentheses, minus 4 equals 10. So we move the c, plug it back in. Make that pretty clear. There we go. We just mush that in there. 6 plus, we have the parentheses, 8 minus 4. Now remember, we start with the parentheses first. Whatever's in here, whatever's happening in here, we deal with that first. Keep it separate. And then we've got 6. And, say that checks out? I think that checks out. So, we've got our right answer. And we can confidently say that for this equation, c equals 8. All right, does anyone have any questions so far? Everything good? Awesome. Now, we're gonna move on to one last problem. And normally I would have, at this point, I'd help me guide me through this, but because you guys are pretty quiet, I'm just gonna go ahead and do it myself. All right, the last problem. We're gonna make this the letter D this time. All right. Where should we start, do you think? Because we have 2 in the way, 2 numbers blocking here. Which one do you think we should start with to get rid of? Well, what we would do, let's move this by itself. And let's just focus on this area. Positive 2 minus 5. I get a 3. So, we can just write it like that. Next step. Move that. All right, what's going on here? Multiplying. So what's next? Dividing. All right, are we done here? Nope. We still have to check our work. Make sure we did it. So we believe that D equals 5. I want to prove with confidence that D equals 5. So, remind ourselves. And the equation okay. So we would plug this back in. And so now we have 2, and because we're multiplying, and this is a number that we're using instead of a letter, let's make it clear that we're multiplying here. And let's just do this now. Let's 2 times 5. 10. All right. Now what do we start with? Go this way. All right, checks out. All right. Now you guys can confidently say that you can do algebra as 5th graders. And how impressive is that?